Welcome to Doc Secret, the show where we uncover the playbooks, strategies, and stories behind the most successful dental and medical practice owners and the companies that serve them. This show is all about building the best practice. Whether you're a dental or medical student dreaming of private practice, a seasoned doctor looking to grow or sell, or an investor exploring the healthcare space, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Kevin Carl, and in today's episode, we're diving into operations and operations management in the dental and veterinary industries. Let's get started. Welcome to Doc Secret. Joining me today is Varuna Trivedi, clinical director at both the Martha Lake and Cedar Plaza veterinary clinics in Seattle, Washington. Interestingly, Varuna is educated as a dentist, has operational depth with a DSO, and now has transitioned into veterinary management. Varuna, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Carl. I'm excited to dive into this conversation.
Well, great. Well, let's start with this, Varuna. Take us back to Mumbai and your background. What first drew you into dentistry?
Yeah. So I grew up in Mumbai and, that's where I was born, raised, got my degree in dentistry and practiced, dentistry, owned my own practice. And taking you back, I think I grew up in a family that had always placed a lot of emphasis on women's education and financial independence. Um, and this is talking 40 years ago now almost. And I think I just aged myself there. But growing up in that environment culturally where marriage kind of is the be all end all for women and not so much, education in India. My dad had a really progressive mindset in that he was clear I would have a career, I should be able to stand on my own 2 feet and, be financially independent. And healthcare being quote unquote the recession proof industry seemed to be the expected path for me. As is for so many Indian families, someone needs to bring home the doctorate. And so that was kind of the conversation ongoing in my house too. So it was laid out for me. But to be honest, and jokes aside, I didn't have it in me or the wherewithal, the motivation and drive to go through human medicine because the long haul that comes with that, I think you really need to have passion for that field. But I think I found my calling in dentistry. It allowed me a perfect blend of a career in healthcare, an opportunity to develop clinical skills, all while allowing me work-life balance that I valued, and then giving me, I guess, at the end of the day, that financial independence that I was taught to prioritize. And so dentistry sort of just happened to be. And now looking in hindsight, I think it gave me my voice, it gave me confidence. It allowed me to walk into rooms and lead with empathy and intellect. And I think, there is something to be said about my unique background, which is the combination of clinical dentistry and having that technical knowledge, but then also having, that leadership backing to then go into practices and try to manage, I guess, from both fronts, trying to understand challenges that come with being a dentist on the floor or being, the support staff on the floor, but then also understanding the needs of a business, and then trying to have a holistic view around that because you understand the little nuances that come with each job and then having to problem solve collaboratively.
Well, we've got a lot to dig into then together.
Yeah.
Tell me about your journey from India to Canada. How did that happen?
So I met my husband, in Canada, and he was living there. So I got married and transitioned life to Canada, and that was a huge transition for me, not just geographically, but I think personally and professionally too. When we moved to Canada, I was at a crossroads because I wasn't able to practice clinical dentistry right off the bat. I would have to recertify, whether that was giving examinations or going back to school. And so I had to sort of reevaluate where I was and where fulfillment for me, would maybe come from within the healthcare space in Canada. And it ended up with me deciding to having to leave clinical dentistry and pivot into business ops. For me, it wasn't natural decision only because when I reflected back on what I wanted to do, I did run my own practice in Mumbai, and I often found myself geeking out on the business side of things, right? How do I guess, scale my practice? How do I increase my patient numbers? Tracking KPIs, and even working on the marketing front, trying to, increase engagement and traffic through our doors versus, clinical hands-on dentistry and providing that care. And so I knew my passion lied more in business operations, and that's where I belonged. But I am pretty type A, and I like going into things prepared. And the sad truth is, dental schools do not equip you with any sort of management training, practice management tools, business foundations. It's so heavily focused on clinical knowledge and clinical dentistry that when you come out of business school, and if you're looking to, move into owning your own practice, say, you kind of have to just, hit the ground running and learn as you go. And so my type A brain was like, I'm not going to be able to do justice to this pivot. I need to get a foundational understanding of business. And so I got my master's in health administration in Vancouver, Canada. And then, stepped into this DSO role as a regional manager with 123 dentists overseeing about 10 dental clinics. And, that was a huge sort of learning moment in my career. I went from being behind the chair or chair side, so to speak, to then being behind the scenes. And so that was life transition from India to Canada. And I think I learned, a lot of gems that I still carry to this day from my experience, within the DSO space, whether that's, how to lead a multi-site sort of practice to mergers and acquisitions and, what goes into a dentist deciding to sell a practice and the value a DSO can provide, whether like, if you're a new dentist or a retiring dentist. And I carry all of those, into VetMed today when I am looking at now managing multiple hospitals.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Let me tease that apart here a little bit. You chose to go an operational rather than a clinical path. We talked a little bit, and you shared with us a little bit about, your rationale for going into dentistry. You shared with us a little bit of the path of, going into a master's in healthcare administration. What was it that drew you to the operational side of medicine versus the clinical side?
Yeah, I think there were a few just personally tipping factors for me. It was a complex and decision, but one was, just trying to evaluate where my passions lie, right? I wasn't passionate about hands-on clinical dentistry as much as business operations, and I found myself sort of leaning towards scaling my own practice back in Mumbai. So that was one of the biggest factors where, I found my calling in the business ops side of things. Number two, had I moved when I was much younger, I think I was 25 when I moved to Canada. And for women, the reality is if you take into consideration, balancing family life and wanting to maybe have children one day, biology will clash at the peak of your career when you're making that transition. And so I knew I wanted to have children maybe at that, 30-year mark. And it takes about 2 to 3 years to get sort of recertified and, get going. And so when I would have hit the peak of my career, I would be looking at having children and taking a break from that again. So just, that was another factor for me. And then thirdly, we weren't tied to the city that we were in Canada. And my husband's job may have him traveling and moving quite a bit. And we wanted that flexibility, right? And dentistry is so heavily regulated, not just country to country, but even state to state. And so for me, the move kind of was an inevitable, factor in the future. And so even just having to move from one province to another or one state to another, I would have to continuously recertify and get relicensed. So just having, I guess, that information at hand, it just made sense for me to move into a role that would allow me transferable skills and be able to jump from, one role to another without having to constantly and forever study.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I appreciate all the complexity that comes into those life decisions. Having made the choices that you did, is there anything you could share with us that you learned from that experience? Was the decision-making process easy? Was it challenging? What were some of the things that you considered, in terms of deciding and really taking the decision to take the path you've taken?
Oh, for sure. I think I'd say financial considerations, family planning, and immigration. I'd say these are your top three things you want to focus on if you are a foreign trained dentist looking to make a move. Financially, it's extremely draining. It's extremely demanding. So know what you're getting into. You may come out with 100,000, $200,000 in debt if you kind of go back to school. Maybe lesser if you're just looking to, recertify and give the examinations. But also the time commitment then that comes with that, right? It could take upwards of 2, 3 years for you to get recertified. And then I reached out to my community on LinkedIn and all of my friends, through Facebook on from everybody who had maybe moved to another country and try to get as much as information as I can as to what life looks like once you have recertified. And a lot of them came back letting me know that you're going to be working evenings, late evenings, you're going to be working weekends because a lot of dentists make money based off of a commission, percentage basis of production. And so a majority of new clients come through your doors after that, 5 o'clock mark until like 7:30, or, Saturday availability. So initially, when you're trying to establish a client base, you're probably going to have to work those hours. So again, taking into consideration family life and trying to balance that, I did not want to work evenings and weekends because that would be an opposing schedule to my husband, and we probably wouldn't spend as much time as we did with me having to pivot and just work a regular 9 to 5. Um, so reach out to your community and see what life would look like even after all that time commitment. And if that is something that you are willing to put time and energy into, by all means do it. It just wasn't something on the cards for me. So that was another factor. And then, of course, wanting to have kids and just, a biological ticking clock, I guess, for women. That was another one for me. So, like I said, you move in at a younger age, maybe you can pursue that. Um, and then, just not being tied to a particular city geographically, that was another thing for me. I would say for foreign trained dentists, know what immigration looks like, because oftentimes I know of friends and colleagues that have moved countries on a student visa only to graduate and then not have figured out what work authorization would look like, and then moving back to your home country because you weren't able to get an employer to sponsor, visas. And that can be a really grueling process. And I think when you are a budding dentist or an early, newly graduated dentist in another country, you don't have all of this information offhand. It's only when you move countries and you kind of learn along the way. So I'm just hoping I can give out as much information as I can through this podcast so people can, take into account these factors.
Well, that's great. And I appreciate you spending time on this because I know that there are a lot of our listeners and our audience would love to hear more about that. So I want to ask you about the move from Mumbai to Canada. And you mentioned that you went straight into a DSO, and we're going to talk about that. How did you make that transition? How did you find the job? How did you decide? Were you sponsored or not? Could you share some more details around that?
Yeah. Definitely. So I came to Canada on a student visa because I was enrolled in, the master's program. And when I graduated, I started applying to jobs, and 123 Dentists at the time was hiring a baby regional manager to oversee 3 dental clinics at the time. And I had managed my own dental office, and so I applied to the job. And I will say my master's program really equipped me with the information and the knowledge that I needed to walk into a dental practice and truly walk the walk, so to speak, right? And so gave me that confidence. I nailed the interview. I got invited. And I think also it opened up a lot of doors. It allowed me a foot in the door because I had that degree. So for anyone, who's trying to make that transition, and especially, if your academia is in clinical dentistry, I would encourage trying to get whether an online master's program or, in school master's program. It really did solidify a lot of operational and business terminologies for me.
Did you have assistance in finding from your university in finding your first role, or how did that work? Did you have to do that on your own? Did you activate a network? How did you come to find 123 dentistry?
Yeah. So my university did help with some job outreach and applications, but 123 Dentist was something that I applied to on Indeed. And I think it was just, I got invited for the interview and I nailed it. It was a little bit of a grueling process, a lot of imposter syndrome going into it, a little bit of a, fake it till you make it. Um, because I didn't really have, hands-on, I guess, management experience within Canada. And I know a lot of my fears were being shot down or rejected because they didn't have that, quote unquote Canadian experience. So I think, you kind of have to talk your way through these interviews sometimes. So, if you can prep ahead of time and have answers ready and just improvise, questions that may come back to you, that really helped me. But it was through my own, applications through Indeed. And I started with 3 dental clinics and overseeing those. I definitely learned a lot on the job. There's everything from insurances that is different in Canada, because in India we don't really have dental insurance. So dabbling in billing to insurances, accounts receivables and payables, production versus collections. All the little nuances that go into managing dental practices, particularly here, labor laws, because as a regional manager, you are involved in onboarding and hiring, especially at the upper level, dentists and hygienists. So what labor laws would look like around that, I think all of that you kind of just learn on the job. And I was lucky enough to have a supportive team of, 10 other regional managers to fall back on and ask questions. And it was a very collaborative environment. And then I slowly worked my way up to, getting my fourth clinic and fifth clinic. And by the end of my third year with them, I had 10 clinics under me.
Wow. Well, first of all, congratulations. Sounds like a fantastic success and track record there. What did you learn about scaling practices during that time?
Yes. So, I had 3 established clinics when I had started. So they were pretty much running on autopilot. I just had to make sure, they continue to grow and if not grow, at least maintain production and, we're performing well. When my fourth practice came along, that was a baby dentist, brand new graduate, wanted to dive into owning his own dental practice versus being an associate. And so that was my first experience with I guess an acquisition. So when I went into that, and this is part of just like scaling, I think the way 123 Dentist operates is they send in regional managers to, audit dental practices if they are established clinics or say a retiring dentist trying to, I guess, sell. So we look at their books, we audit their practice management software, we look at KPIs like, active patient numbers, revenue per visit or revenue per day, number of doctors, and I guess, look a little bit in their profit loss statements to see where their EBITDA finally lands after taking out payroll, cost of goods sold, facility admin, costs like that. So when it came to scaling, it was always regional managers going in, auditing the health of the practice, whether that was financial or medical, taking that back to our director of operations, and then the DSO mergers and acquisitions team kind of going in and negotiating the terms of the sale.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I had my fifth clinic, and that was, a sale because the dentist was retiring. So, I think, there's multiple reasons why someone may want to partner with a dental support organization. I think the last few clinics I acquired was just, an owner who was extremely fatigued, decision fatigue, exhaustion from trying to run a practice, but having very little business understanding and just wanted support on, leadership front and accounting and bookkeeping. And so he had 2 locations that he finally partnered up with 123 Dentist for that added support so that he could focus on clinical practice while being like a part owner, but then also not having to worry about the business operations and still staying profitable.
Great. And well, your role, I'd love to dig in a little bit about your role in the M&A process. So it sounds like there's any variety of reasons for an acquisition. Makes sense as you've described it. What was your role in the M&A process, and how did you facilitate a smooth transition into the DSO under your management and leadership?
Yeah. So RMs had a small role to play in mergers and acquisitions. I think, when a practice went on sale, most of the brokers would reach out to our M&A team, or the M&A team would reach out saying, we're interested in this sale. I think the initial vetting process would happen through that team, and then the RMs would be sent in to look at the health of the practice, audit the practice management software, audit the books, and bring back that information to the M&A team, just from a clinical, medical, and financial KPI standpoint. Um, I think at the time, 123 Dentists was not interested in practices under, I want to say, about 2 or 3 million. So if it was a single doctor practice making any less than that, it was just off the books for them. It was too small to even go through the acquisition. Um, For me, I think regional managers were often looked at as the corporate bad guys, right? So when we walk into these practices to introduce ourselves and to make that transition seamless, I just had to go in with an open mind because I knew I would be met with pushback and resistance. Um, and rightly so, because, the practice had been operating for 30 plus years, doing things a certain way. And then, suddenly they get acquired by corporate, and I guess, we're going to go in and change stuff. And so I had to keep an open mind. I was met with a ton of pushback. But I think you just have to keep persevering, have your, presence in those practices, go on, introduce yourselves, maybe slowly start to make changes. But I think I had to step back and listen and understand. So one-on-ones with the teams, everybody from, front desk all the way to the office manager. Um, of course, the owner has already bought in because he's decided to sell. So having the owner's support in transitioning and making changes slowly is crucial. So my first meeting is always with the I guess ex owner or part owner, if he continues to stay on. Just understanding bottlenecks, pitfalls, whether we need a house cleanup and who needs to go, or what improvements we can make, and try and retain the staff, because it has been a well-oiled machine. So there's a range of conversation to be had, just to understand where we can provide support on an RM level. Um, and then I think just getting employee buy-in, I think that comes slowly with conversations. Hey, I'm not here to change things. I'm just trying to understand workflows and, maybe recommend improvements. This is where my experience lies, but I am going to defer to you as the expert. I think a lot of them just want that validation that, they're being appreciated and they know what they do and that they can provide value. So trying to get their input, and then, of course, utilizing that in keeping things that are working, and then also slowly introducing changes to make improvements.
And what would you say is the secret sauce, right? Is this doc secret? So is there a secret to a smooth transition? You mentioned listening, but and that seems so obvious, right? And I'm sure that played a big role in that. But do you have any sort of secret saucy type lessons for us around how to, um, let's say, gently fold in a dental practice into a DSO like that?
Yeah. Honestly, Kevin, I think it's all personality dependent. I have dealt with a range of personalities. I've had office managers that are bought in right off the bat because, they're looking for change and they were kind of, fed up with the way things were being run. Two office managers who are so in love with their jobs and so tied to the way they did things that it's hard for them to let go. And change is definitely hard. It is for me too. But just going in saying, hey, look, and I think it's just being, open, honest, vulnerable, and having space for real conversations, right? I'm just talking to you on a human to human level. I'm trying to do my job. You're trying to do your job. And I often had these conversations with them, right? I'm here, yes, on a corporate front. And the one thing that 123 Dentist was very clear on is we don't want to come in and have a standardized way of operating. We want to leave the autonomy to our dentists and, have them practice dentistry and not take away from and, apply corporate, I guess, protocols and workflows. So they did allow that autonomy, and every dental practice functions differently under the 123 Dentist umbrella. And I think that is the beauty of allowing employees to work the way they did. And, that eventually leads to employee buy-in. But if I had to go in and say, hey, we're going to be doing XYZ and I'm here to implement it, that would absolutely be met with resistance and pushback, right? So I think trusting the owners that you partner with and then allowing that autonomy, which then translates to us giving our, teams that autonomy and leeway, um, I think has been game changing.
Great. Well, what a career that must have been to start out right in those leadership roles and difficult conversations. Let's fast forward here. Your husband, if I understand it, landed a job at Amazon, and you relocate to Seattle. And instead of working in dentistry, you leap into veterinary medicine as a clinical director. Walk us through that decision. What excited you? What scared you? How did you approach that?
Yeah. So we moved to the US, and, while dentistry has always been a passion of mine, I was just coming out of a long maternity leave. And I just found myself increasingly drawn to broader opportunities and challenges within the healthcare umbrella overall. And the role of clinical director honestly came my way again on Indeed. The practice owner was looking for somebody to oversee both dental clinics. So he reached out. I wasn't looking for a job at the time. I was still, in my maternity. My daughter was, 9 months old at the time. Um, and I wasn't ready to go back. I was like, I'm going to wait for a year and we'll see, what I want to do. But we started exploring that conversation and everything, he presented in terms of what the hospital stands for and what they're doing and what sort of the future would look like, all sounded so exciting. And I felt that I could really make an impact with my experience in a new, more meaningful context. So I think that really excited me is to be able to transfer my skills in an industry that's rooted in deep compassion against that human animal bond. And there were a lot of parallels between the two industries. I think VetMed struggles with the same challenges as dental does in burnout, client communication, meeting clients' expectations, profitability, recruitment, and retention. So, I was like, I have experience with this, and, I can bring in so much value to these hospitals. Um, so that was exciting, but I think what scared me, I'd say, it was the learning curve and just having imposter syndrome. I was getting back into the workforce, not only in a new country, but in a new industry after 3 years of being on maternity leave. So imposter syndrome was big. It was huge. But also the learning curve, while I'm like familiar with clinical environments and team dynamics, I'd say VetMed has its own language, its own emotional landscape, and its own standards of care. So walking into the hospitals and trying to understand the little nuances, and then earning employees' trusts and the team's trust, saying, hey, I'm somebody who knows nothing about this industry, but I'm here to tell you how we're going to be doing things. That was another challenge, right? But I think I had done it 10 times over on the DSO front, trying to gain employees' trust, just trying to understand and, speak, I guess, technically to these team members. That was a challenge that scared me. But I mean, it made the challenge even more exciting. And today I get to support teams that are doing life-changing work, and it's been incredibly fulfilling.
That's great. Well, it sounds again like once again, soft skills are, of the essence, right? They're the key to making that work for you. I want to dive into how you manage today. Set some context for us. You have Cedar Plaza Vet Clinic and Martha Lake Vet Clinic. Now, how are the locations managed? Are they managed as two single practices or as one multi-location practice? Help us understand the business.
Yeah. So they're both two distinct locations, but they are owned by the same practice owner. Um, I think Cedar Plaza is about like 25 years old now, and Martha Lake was established about 10 years ago in 2015. Um, and while they are their two distinct locations with their own cultures and their own community presence, they do share centralized leadership and they share staff that are shared across, SOPs and consistent cross training. And we also do share doctors across locations. And what's unique about our setup is that while they both function as their own single sites, in that they do deliver that personalized care and keep in touch with local relationships with their clientele, they leverage benefits of scale, right? So because we share doctors and we share client base and a similar sort of, I guess, practice management software, it allows for, problem solving across sites easier because I'm able to send, I guess, doctors from one location to another or support staff from one to the other. But it also allows for flexibility for our clientele in terms of scheduling without breaking that continuity of care. Because I'm able to, maybe not see you at one location. I can see you in another. It's the same places, it's the same team, and it's in continuation of treatment. So yeah, I mean, they're single practices, but they have the benefit of scale.
Mm-hmm. And as a clinical director, sounds like there's a lot of management of meeting client needs and managing doctors and staff across locations. Let's maybe tease apart what a typical week for you might look like. Could you describe that for us?
Yeah. So, Kevin, I mean, I think in my role, no 2 weeks are the same, but that's what makes this role so exciting. I shared my time or my league between the two locations, but it's never a 50-50 split. It really depends on which hospital needs support at any given point in time. If I had to give you a snapshot of my week, I'd say it's a mix of leadership meetings, one-on-ones, case reviews with my doctors, trying to understand quality of medicine, any hiccups or bottlenecks they may be dealing with, all while, working through, I guess, operational and scheduling challenges that come along the way on the day-to-day. I try to spend time looking ahead, so whether that's forecasting for growth, looking at our profit loss statements and analyzing them for trends, making sure that our expenses are trending under benchmark, so that, at the end of the day, we can stay profitable. That is a huge part of my week. I'm also involved in onboarding, coaching, training, more for my, higher level teams. And then I have an office manager who will recruit for reception roles and maybe a kennel attendant, stuff like that. So that definitely seems to help take the load off. But I do try to stay grounded in the day to day of the clinics and stay connected with the teams. I will jump in when needed. I've played every role from receptionist to restraining, dogs and cats in the back when needed to be an extra pair of hands. But I think the balancing act for me is trying not to get too much into the weeds of the day to day. So I still have time to continue to things strategically and, make time to make sure that we're working towards building something sustainable. So whether that's brainstorming ideas for workflows or improvements, I definitely take time to think along the sides of business growth.
And what would you say right now is the biggest challenge you face in your business?
Um, I think the biggest challenge we're facing right now is maintaining consistency across the two locations as we continue to grow and making sure that the teams feel connected to our core values. So as two locations are growing and we're adding new verticals, we are primarily a small animal practice seeing just canine feline species, but we have expanded now to the exotic vertical. So we have all types of fun species coming through our doors. And the team's been growing too, right, with that. So we're being really intentional, trying to make sure that our teams feel connected to our the three C's: culture, communication, and clinical standards. And whether that's through team meetings, leadership development, putting in better systems, maybe automation, or just making space for real conversations through like our touch points. I think I try to stay connected with the teams as much as I can because I think it can be so easy to start working in silos, especially as the days start to get busy and then we're just trying to go through the motions. Um, I think what's making this challenge harder, though, is the added layer of industry-wide challenges. And, this is across dentistry, across VetMed, is recruiting for top talent, retaining that top talent, and then driving motivation when you have, key players on your team. So trying to stay consistent while dealing with all of that is definitely, added to the challenge. And I will add that we are definitely facing something that's unique to us in that we're a small business, we're privately owned. And in the corporate takeover and corporatization that's happening in VetMed right now, the biggest challenge we're facing is trying to stay profitable, trying to beat the corporates and trying to, provide cutting edge medicine so that we can keep our lights on. We're holding strong. We're not sort of buying into that corporate takeover, but that's definitely been a challenge as well.
I can certainly appreciate that. I know somebody that's on the private equity side of veterinary care, and you're up against formidable foes in that. So I can appreciate that. And I know veterinary care has its own regulatory landscape as well. What has surprised you most compared with human dentistry on the regulatory front?
Oh, yes, for sure. Yes, like you said, in dentistry, there's a lot of strict standardized regulations around compliance and licensing. And those are quite uniform across the board. And, you're held accountable by a college or a board of dentists, right? What surprised me the most in VetMed is while there are regulations around, medication use and procedures and things like that, licensing requirements too, um, the lack of accountability. There is no board of surgeons, there's no college overseeing how the hospitals are run. And there's pros and cons with that. I think the pros are that every hospital you go to will function its own way, and it allows then for a hospital to serve to their demographic, their own unique communities in terms of services they want to offer, species they want to see, or price points they want to offer. But the downside is that you have to have constant ongoing efforts to try and keep up with regulations, newer technologies, maybe medication formulations, and you have to go out seeking that information versus, in dentistry where those regulations are being rolled out on, say, a platform or a magazine or through the college or the board. And that's surprising for me, specifically in vet med, because we're dealing so much with, heavily controlled substances or general anesthesia, which we don't typically use in, dentistry. Dentistry is all about local and freezing. But in vet med, every day in my OR, I have, an animal under general anesthesia. And so I'm like, how do we not have more regulations around this, because it's so much, like such high risk. And then, we're euthanizing patients too, right? And that involves controlled substances. When we put our pets to sleep, again, that is a pretty high risk process. So that maybe would be something that really surprised me is the lack of how standardized protocols are around pet med. And I think there's a need for that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing some insight there. You talk about standardization, it naturally brings to mind KPIs and key performance indicators that are used to measure business performance. Which KPIs matter most to you for clinical performance? Medical, financial? I would love to hear your insights on that.
Yeah. So I mean, I measure both medical and financial. On the medical side, I like to watch for patient outcomes, treatment plan outcomes, patient satisfaction, whether that's through Google reviews or reviews on any other internal platforms that you may be using. It really gives a snapshot of the medical care being delivered from a client perspective. And then on the financial front, I geek out on my active patient numbers, revenue per visit, revenue per doctor. I also look at average client transactions. In dentistry particularly, I loved weekly tracking hygiene retention. If those numbers are good, it kind of trickles down to overall revenue and health of the practice and patient compliance. But I will say, while I do track both medical and financial KPIs, I like to have a very balanced approach in viewing those KPIs. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. If one trends upwards, it automatically has a direct impact on the other. If you are delivering quality medicine, you're going to see the financial health of your practice, sort of level up too. So when I'm looking at these KPIs, I try to look at them from a more holistic standpoint.
Yeah, and so you're looking at them from a holistic standpoint and across two practices, right? So while you're monitoring those KPIs, both medical and financial, how do you maintain consistent, patient, in this case, let's call it not only the pets, but the pet owners? How do you maintain a consistent experience across those locations?
Yeah. So, going back to our question, when you asked me, the biggest challenge we're facing is maintaining consistency. Um, so there's been a few things that have worked for us. We put in some systems in place to, help us stay consistent. I'd say if to any practice manager, if you are looking at multi-site and trying to provide consistent care, because, when clients are walking through your doors, they're not walking in to see a Dr. A or a Dr. B. They're walking into one roof and expecting the same standard of care. Whether they see Dr. A today and B the next day, they want to hear the same diagnosis. And so I think training is key. I have 4 lead team members that departmentally that will train my new hires. So when knowledge is being imparted the same way over and over by the same source down to the new hires, if my lead CSR is running reception one way and she trains my new hires the same way, that you know, I guess works with consistent delivery of care to our um, clients at the front desk. And so I have a lead CSR, I have a lead assistant, I have a lead technician, and then my practice owner mentors all our doctors. And I think that has really worked with training the new hires in a consistent way. I think cross training has been another big one for me. I do often cross train when possible my front desk to be assistants and assistants to be front desk. And, this helps with not being as regulated because, you don't necessarily have to quote unquote be certified in the vet industry to be able to work a certain role. So when possible, I do cross train. Of course, I cannot cross train somebody to do a doctor's job or a technician's job. But, for example, I had my assistant who had to run home for a family emergency after lunch, and I was able to pull one of my receptionists to the back. And, because they had been cross trained the same way, again, it plays into consistently delivering the same standard of care. So when possible, I'd say consistently cross training definitely helps. And then another thing that we have put in place is easy access to information. We are very process dependent, not people dependent. And we use a platform called Trainual for housing all our SOPs. And all our employees know where to go if they need to know, say, how to use an ultrasound or how to take an x-ray to how to book an appointment. Everything is on that platform and it's easily available. So whenever people dependent, if somebody wants to know how to do ABC, they know where to go and how to get it and how to deliver then that consistent standard of care. So I'd say these 3 things have been key in trying to maintain consistency.
Sure. And your staff supported by great processes and systems sounds like a recipe for success. Are there any processes or systems that, based on your dental background, have translated to veterinary care, or is it more conceptual in terms of the crossover in your mind from one industry to the other?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of parallels. I think we do a lot of things similar to dental in, patient intake, taking history to then, client checkout. So I think workflows are similar. But the one thing I did bring over from dentistry would be forward booking. We all know that, dentists in the dental industry have mastered forward booking. I mean, you're in the dental chair, gauze is still in your mouth, and your dentist is asking you, when can I see you next? Or I need to see you in another 2 weeks and has an appointment booked for you, right? And God forbid you leave that dental clinic without your next appointment booked. Your dentist is going to call you 7 times that you're asking you when we can see you next. And so it's just ingrained in me was a fiber of, my workflow. So when I moved to VetMed, I saw these clients walking out the door with estimates in hand, with no follow-up. And receptionist just saying, just give us a call when you're ready to book. And that blew my mind. I was like, this cannot be happening because, that's like thousands of dollars of treatment walking out the door and there is no follow-up. And so I think forward booking has been a big system or a big process that I have now introduced into VetMed. And, we're now at 89% forward booking rate, and it's obviously translated in patient compliance and then, revenue. Um,
Great.
yeah.
Well, let's flip the script then. Conversely, what have you learned in the vet space that you wish dentists knew?
Yes. I've got 3 for you. Empathy, empathy, empathy. um, I think in VetMed, and I wish more dentists appreciated, is the emotional depth and complexity that can go into, a client-doctor relationship. In VetMed, we often not only treat the pet, but we're also, dealing with a deeply invested owner, who's walking through our doors with big sense of worry. And so our doctors are trained in meeting them with empathy and compassion that goes way beyond just direct medicine, right? And I think that perspective, I wish I had in dentistry, because often, dental appointments can be anxiety inducing and deeply personal to a lot of people. And if we could meet our clients and address their concerns more holistically, recognizing the emotional context when providing care, I think that could make the client experience so much more, I guess smoother and easier for our dental patients.
Sure. And I know, finding people with empathy, that's a key skill. It's not easily recognizable in resumes. And I know both industries wrestle with staffing shortages. So what recruitment or retention tactics for that matter have worked best for you in finding that best talent?
Yeah. I mean, recruitment, is an ongoing battle. I had locums and temporary staff coming through our doors on the dental front, and it's the same in VetMed. We've had a year almost of relief doctors last year. And so I think what worked for me now, where we are in a place where we have stable staff and like, 8 doctors that we've hired, has been AHA accreditation for our hospitals. AHA is the American Academy of Hospital Association, sorry. And they accredit hospitals based off of the standard of care being delivered, the medicine, medical record keeping, pharmacy, to the equipment that you house. And it's rigorous inspections. I think it took us almost 2 years to get accredited. And I think only 5% of hospitals in all of North America, including Canada, can say that they are AHA accredited. And this isn't for, client perspective, it's more to retain and attract talent. And I think doctors are looking to be part of AHA accredited hospitals because they know that they will be supported with high quality medicine, medical record keeping, the right staff, the right equipment. And so when we got that accreditation, we had a barrage of actually resumes come through for doctors wanting to apply to our open roles. That was a key player in attracting talent. We also leverage employee referrals. We've gotten a few doctors from, employees who work at, previous hospitals, sent them our way. We also partner with local schools and programs in the area. We are a teaching hospital. So we have often, externs, interns coming through our doors trying to complete their rotations through us that have then resulted in full-time hires. Um, in terms of retention, that's been a tricky one, and we've had to be creative with what we can offer to keep staff. Work-life balance is a big one, and not just in the sense of, trying to cut overtime on staff and making sure they get home. I'll give you an example of how we really implemented work-life balance for our teams. So for almost a decade, both hospitals' business hours were Monday through Saturday, 9 to 7. And when I started with the hospitals back in 2023 and did, my first rounds of one-on-ones, and I asked the teams, what would be the one thing you would change, now that I'm here, or just give me feedback. And I got a resounding response of Saturdays are really long days. We don't get out of here before like 7:15 most days. And, that's our weekend essentially. And so, businesses really don't change business hours typically after like a decade of working a certain way, and especially if it's bringing in revenue on a Saturday, which was one of our highest producing days. Um, but the practice owners, really listened to the staff, and we changed our business hours, and, we work shorter Saturdays now. We're off at 4. And while that has maybe, meant that we take a hit a little bit revenue wise, it's led to higher staff retention, more engagement, and motivated teams. And I think my practice owners see value in that. Um, the other thing I'd say that has helped in retention of teams is flex schedules. We have doctors that are new parents, so they work part-time, they work full-time, and we kind of work around these schedules for them. And I think career growth, this is a big one, in terms of wanting to keep your, strong players on for a long time. I think oftentimes roles like reception, or assisting, there's no like next step. Maybe of your six receptionists, one may jump up to being a manager, or somebody in the back, one of your clinical teams may move up to managing a practice. But what happens to your other five receptionists, right? Are they doing the same thing for 2, 3, 4 years? And how do you retain them? So we work on career pathing for our teams. I have a receptionist who came from car sales, and she was excellent at the front, right? She just came with that customer service mindset. And she was with us for about 2 years. I mean, she still is. But at that 2 year mark at her review, I was like, what's next for you, right? Can you take on more, or do you want to do something? And we opened a new role for her. She is now my treatment coordinator for all our surgeries. And, she's booking our surgeries out like 3 months, and she's crushing it. So I think if you can invest in your teams continuing to grow with you, you're going to be able to retain them.
Well, and you obviously have done well with that. How do you bring in talent? You mentioned the retention, some of the how you hire. How do you build culture? If I go back to this concept that you've really spent a lot of time on, how do you create a shared culture, which is maybe different than business operations, right? It's really more around a vibe, respect for each other, et cetera. How do you manage that shared culture in your practice?
Yeah, I think I mentioned cross training. And I think, if front desk wants to understand what the pain points are working as a technician, they need to get into those shoes. They need to be on the floor. They need to restrain an animal or give a vaccine and just understand, I guess, the workflow of that to know where those bottlenecks are in that role. And similarly for my, clinical staff, work a day as reception and see how much they need to multitask, right? While the phones are ringing, you're trying to scan documents or trying to check out a client, there's like seven things happening at once. And so when they work both roles, I think they have more appreciation for one another. And that really fosters, I guess that team centered approach and having grace for one another versus getting frustrated with, hey, the back didn't walk the client to the front. I don't know what was done in the back. I don't know if I'm ready to check out. Is invoice ready? And so I am a big proponent of cross training your teams when possible, even if that means, 1 week of working a certain role just to understand workflows. Um, I think your communication is definitely, something that can help mitigate any confusion and again foster, a team spirit and teamwork. So in dentistry, we do this really well too, is the client walkout and handoff. And I think, translating that here, again, that is another system that I have implemented is when the client checks in, I need reception to alert the back. But when the treatment is done, the assistant needs to escort the client up to the front, reiterate to the front desk what was exactly done in the room, what's on that invoice, and what the client needs to come back for. If these three things are not done, the front desk is holding the back accountable in that they are not checking the client out. And so they've been working really well in communicating with one another. And I think that's sort of mitigating any sort of misunderstandings and miscommunications and fostering more of a shared culture between teams.
Great. Well, supporting all of that, I'm sure, is technology, which can be a great enabler, can also make the cross training more challenging. Which technologies, whether it's telehealth, practice management software, maybe now with AI diagnostics, which technologies are making the biggest difference in your clinics?
Yeah, so we absolutely love VetScribe. We use it daily, and I think it's taken away time from our doctors spending making notes into translating them and allowing them time, FaceTime with clients, right? That's what they should focus on. That's where the need is. Please spend time in the room. We don't want you spending time making your notes. So it's given time back to my doctors, and we leverage that. Absolutely love it. I also work for a practice owner who's a complete tech junkie, and he's all about, the new AI diagnostics. So in the last year, we invested in the AI microscope by Zoetis called the Imagist. And we've been running a ton of in-house labs with this nifty little microscope. And I think there's definitely been benefits with that. It's been accurate in terms of testing. It's, reduced turnaround time for our clients to hear back on their lab results. And it's also proven to be cost effective. And then telehealth wise, that is something that is a newly emerged sort of service that we've been dabbling with. And I think the need arose when we onboarded our exotics doctor. We have, like I said, expanded into this exotics vertical, and a lot of these species only need to be seen on a case by case basis. We don't really need to see them routinely. It's only when they are sick that we need to see them. And so we had a client who found us online, lived about an hour away from us, and had an axolotl, and it's like an amphibian salamander from Mexico, right? And seemed like it was unwell. And the drive alone, and the stress of the drive alone, and the temperature irregulation in the car could have killed this species. And so the doctor recommended that he would get on the phone, do a phone consultation, and maybe share some images via email, and really try and help the client, fax out a prescription to the pharmacy, and try and problem solve fix. So I think telemedicine really proved to be, helpful in this situation, but it's a service that we are excited to kind of grow and develop as we continue to see newer species.
Sure, yeah. And I can imagine with newer species becomes new courses of treatment. There's a lot to learn there. I know that this continuous process of education is important in the medical field. So what does professional development look like, say, for your vets today versus what you experienced in dentistry? And how do you support professional development today?
Yeah. Um, I think on the dentistry front, continuing ed was really focused on, mastering technical skills, a lot of hands-on clinical continuing education around keeping up with newer technologies and, just mastering or refining your technical skill. And while there are a lot of wet labs and practical hands-on continuing education courses for veterinarians, I think there's a lot more focus on client education, client communication, a lot of continuing education around emotional care for our patients. I oftentimes find my doctors wanting to attend CE that is around, I guess, compassionate care, or how to gently handle euthanasia appointments, for example, or even just how to communicate with clients. And I found that was less in dentistry, and dentistry had more focus on mastering clinical skills. And I think the difference again, lands with dentistry being more of a practical profession. Like, you actually have to use your hands and perform the procedure, and a lot of vets may not do surgeries, and they'll see you on an appointment basis, and there's a lot more communication, and they might just send you home with medication, for example. So they need to focus on client communication primarily. I think the way we support it, and I mentioned that we are teaching hospitals, so at least for our new grads, my practice owner has a robust mentorship program, and he's available anywhere from 6 months to a year to mentor a new grad until they are ready to kind of, be on their own. And that starts from him being available hands-on to scrub into surgeries while they watch, to then them scrubbing in and him being available in the operating room, to then kind of being available in the building, to then, being available on the phone. And I think that uh, has worked really well with us mentoring. I think we're onto the seventh new grad we're mentoring now.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, it takes time and effort, but again, I think it's something that my practice owner sees himself as a teacher. I think that's his next step in his career, of course, being a business owner. But he really enjoys that piece. And we also support technicians. We partner with schools. We have externs through our doors. We just, make time for that. And I think it's in the hopes that we get a full-time hire and we continue to grow from there. And then for our more seasoned vets, we are an AHA accredited hospital. So there's a lot of resources and continuing ed that comes our way that, we encourage doctors to attend. Of course, the CE allowance is built into all our clinical staff's pay packages, and we encourage that, they get compensated for it as long as something is coming back through our doors that they can apply. Um, And we are also part of VMG. There's a ton of like buying groups in VetMed, and BMG is a veterinary management group. So a lot of CE comes through that as well, which our seasoned vets most likely will sort of leverage.
That makes sense. I know, quite frankly, given your earlier comments on staffing, that finding talent is always a challenge. Maybe let's personalize this a bit and dive a little bit deeper on your background and get some of your recommendations. Many international clinicians debate recertifying in the US versus pivoting to a new role. In your case, what factors tip the scale for you?
Sure. So recertification can be extremely lengthy, demanding, not just, mentally, but financially too. It's time consuming. Um, And I think every dentist, when they're moving, I think a core part of our identity is we've done this for X number of years. This is all we know, so we must recertify. And I was at a similar crossroads, but it felt a little bit natural to me when I really took a pause and reevaluated where my passion, really lied. And for me, because I came from a family that kind of just put it on me to be a doctor, that wasn't my path. And I really enjoyed, the business operation side of things. So personally, for me, just trying to understand where my passions lied was a big factor in being like, hey, I'm going to pivot. This is where I think I can provide value and thrive, and I really enjoy. The second
That's
fact,
great.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, go
Uh,
ahead, please.
Yeah, and then the second factor was, financially, and then, considering family life and then relocation. So I think all of that kind of played into tipping the scales to pivoting for me.
Well, that's great. And you've been managing and leading practices and people in multiple countries now. How did your Canadian and Indian experience shape your leadership style? And have you had to adapt your style in any way to work here in the US?
100%, yeah. It's a loaded question, but I mean, reflecting back, I think working in India, where the hierarchical structure is kind of common in most workplaces, I work in a similar sort of, landscape. And what I took away from that was resiliency, discipline, and I think that's where my grit comes from. And then working in Canada, the focus was more on inclusivity, collaboration, a work-life balance, which was non-existent in India. I'd work at my clinic until like 9 or 10 p.m. because that's when the clients were available. And so I think working both contrasts gave me a more sort of well-rounded perspective on how to lead, with empathy and just recognizing that every, you know, voice in the room matters, has value, but then also staying true to, staying motivated and, wanting to do better. And then pivoting to the US, I've had to adapt again. I think here people value rapid decision making and more direct communication, especially in high taste environments. Canada just seemed a little more lax with that. Um, and so I have had to be a little more assertive, more transparent, all while holding true to, what's core to me is team-centered values and staying empathetic. And I think what's helped me adapt is, like I said, my experience in Canada as a regional manager, right? Going into clinics time after time and being met with pushback and resiliency and then converting that into employee buy-in and then, being part of a team, that, navigating that change really helped build adaptability in me and helped me transition not only into a US market, but into a whole new industry.
That's great. Well, what advice would you give to internationally trained doctors who are coming here to the US and have that decision ahead of them? What advice would you give them?
I'd say don't tie your self-worth or value solely to your clinical title. I know you've put in time and effort into becoming a dentist and holding that doctor title, but your skills, your experience, and your perspective means so much more than just that clinical title, even if it means it's different from the original path that you had imagined for yourself. So take time to reevaluate where your passion lies. Is it in clinic? Is it in leadership? Is it in teaching? And if you have to make a pivot, just understand that a pivot is not a step back, it's a step in a new direction. And it's going to open doors for you, that you probably didn't even expect. And adaptability is your superpower. You've already done one of the hardest things there is to do is starting over in a new country. And that adaptability will carry you through no matter what path you choose. So, yeah, just have faith.
That's great advice for anyone of any nationality and at any stage of life. Adaptability is certainly key to finding happiness in a variety of circumstances. Varuna, reflecting on your career and your start in Mumbai, what do you wish they had taught you in dental school?
Oh gosh, business management. I wish there was one module around financials or business management or what it would take when you finally graduate as a dentist and want to run your own practice. What does practice management look like? And maybe lesser focus on the clinical, aspect of it.
Well, that's great advice. And let's speak now to let's say dental or veterinary school students, for that matter, who are starting to look beyond graduation. What advice do you have for them?
Um, I'd say, are we talking about them moving countries?
In general, so they're let's say their second, maybe third year in dental school, they're starting to look, or veterinary school for that matter, they're starting to look beyond graduation, trying to figure out what type of practice, private practice, DSO, there's a lot of choices in front of them. Do you have any advice for how to sort through making that decision, a good decision for where to invest their time and energy after graduation?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely say try and apply to roles that are established practices, whether they're DSO or private. But someone and practice that will mentor you will have a strong team that can support you because as a new graduate, you have so much to learn and so much you don't know. And if you are part of a team that is able to support you, and I know that's hard to find right off the bat when you go in for one interview for 30 minutes and it's just, a conversation. If you can go in and job shadow, if you can volunteer to understand team dynamics and workflow before jumping into an offer, I'd say, it's worth asking and worth investing your time in because finding a practice that's right for you can be invaluable in gaining experience and clinical skill and building that client base over time.
That's great, Varuna. Thank you. Well, as you know, we always wrap our show here on Doc Secret with a lightning round, Varuna. So these are quick questions. First thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's go. What is one business metric every clinic owner should track weekly?
Hygiene retention in dentistry and treatment plan acceptance rate in VetMed.
Okay. Very definitive answer there. Great.
Yes.
What book has had the greatest impact on you personally or professionally?
If Disney Ran Your Hospital by Fred Lee.
Oh, wow. First I've heard that one.
Yes, it's a
What
gem.
is your, sorry?
It's a gem. You have to
It's a
read
gem.
it.
All right. Thanks for the recommendation. What is your favorite podcast?
I really enjoy listening to the Positive Leadership podcast by Andrea Crabtree and David Liss.
Great. Now, is it coffee or tea that gets you through most days? What's your typical order?
Coffee Monday through Friday and then masala chai on the weekend.
Nice. Nice. What do you think is the most underrated skill for scaling any type of medical practice?
Effective communication.
And in one word, the future of veterinary care is what?
Innovation.
Nice. Nice. Varuna Trivedi, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed having you here on Doc Secret. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for the conversation. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. If you liked today's episode, please like and subscribe, and most importantly, share this podcast with others you think may benefit from the Doc Secrets shared here today. Thanks for joining us on today's episode, and we'll see you next time.